Hi, I'm Alan Denoyer. I work for Archaeology Southwest here in town. We're a nonprofit and we teach people about archaeology and protecting and preserving archaeological resources. I'm here at Steam Pump Ranch where we are going to do some work today on this pit house reconstruction that we've done, or I should say replica that we've made. So what we're doing today out here is we're working on this pit house that we built out here about 6 years ago. This pit house is it's a reconstruction of what we think they may have looked like, and it's based on pit houses that were excavated a number of years ago up at Rancho Vistoso, up the road up here. This pit house is based on the Hohokam time period pit houses of around, it would probably be about 700 to 800 years ago, when a structure like this is what they would have looked like. The people were building their houses like this. So what they did was the prehistoric peoples came in and they dug a big pit in the ground, and then they built a structure out of that pit. So the pit is actually kind of sunk down into the ground. By doing that, they were able to, it keeps you cooler in the summer, and in the winter it keeps you warmer. And then they would build this framework using poles, sticks, mats, grass sometimes, and mud over the top of it, kind of like an upside down basket. And so what we did is we came here and we built this house based on evidence that we found excavating these houses up the road. And so when sometimes these houses burn down and you find chunks of adobe with impressions in them from the building materials. So based on that, and then we also have the post hole pattern. When they would dig holes in the ground to put the posts in, we can find those. So we go out and we dig the pit that's left. None of the structure is left. We got the pit with the post holes, and sometimes if they burn down, we get those impressions with construction materials impressed into the mud. And then when the house burned down, the mud fires, kind of like pottery, and it preserves those. So that's what this is based on. This house, it rains periodically, and every time it work on it and remodeling, because the mud that we're using here erodes. They didn't have any special binders or anything like that they put into the mud. So every time it rained, you had to work on your house and you had to fix it. This house has now been around over 6 years, and so we've got a beam or two that's sagging inside, and so we're here today to start work on just kind of fixing it up, fixing a beam that's ready to, maybe not ready to break, but it needs to be replaced. Okay, so we're working on this pit house, but I also want to talk to you guys today a little bit about farming and how these people did it. These people grew corn, beans, and squash, and we know the corn came into Tucson about over 4,000 years ago. So over here we have some examples of prehistoric agricultural fields like we find when we're excavating mostly around here down in the Santa Cruz, along the Santa Cruz River floodplain. But these people were living along all the rivers along down here. So you could go to the San Pedro, you could go the next valley over. Anywhere you go where there's water, you're going to find evidence of where people were living and doing agriculture along in the Southwest here. Gotta do it, because water won't flow uphill. So when they were building their fields and they're running the water out into the field cells, these little field cells, they would plug the ditches. So this ditch right here represents a lateral canal, which is one of the bigger ditches. And then they run the water down that ditch, and then they would berm it across the same way I did here. They just put a little... They put a berm in it. So you can imagine they have a lot more water. This is just a hose running. They have a bigger head of water running down the ditch. That head of water would hit their little berm and then send it down the lateral. Then they would plug it with dirt to run it into the individual field cells. So this technology was used in the Tucson Basin for more than over 4,000 years. We have evidence of these agricultural fields down along the floodplain of the Santa Cruz. And so we have areas where there are fields that are probably 17 or 18 levels and layers of fields stacked on top of each other. There'd be a flood and it would bury the fields, but the floods would spread out across the floodplain and deposit a layer of sands and silts. And then, but because it's slow moving water, it would drop the sediments evenly and it would reflect up the fields through the stratigraphy. So they just come back and work the ditches again and do a little bit of work and fix them up, and they could just keep using their fields for generation after generation after generation. So we know corn comes into the Southwest over 4,000 years ago. We have corn here in Tucson. So people have been growing that, doing agriculture for a long time. This system of where they would dig canals out of the river and run it up into the floodplain and into these gridded out field systems has been going on for probably 4,000 years. It came in with agriculture. When corn came in, that was already developed down south, down in Mexico, down in that country somewhere. So it's a very old technology. What we think of as the hohokam around here, when folks, that goes back about 1,500 years ago, and that's when they were making pottery. But people have been living here way longer than that and growing corn and doing agriculture much, much longer than that. So that's just the more recent stuff. And so when we're digging and working down in the floodplain, we find acres of fields. We use backhoes with big scraping blades. We can scrape the surface of the ground and we can see the stripes of the canals and the lateral ditches and the field cells, because oftentimes they're built out of sediments that are one color, and you'll get a flood that comes in and drops sediments of a different color because it's coming from a different area. And so when we're digging with our backhoe with the big scraping blade, we scrape over these fields and we can see the stripes of these berms. We dig very slow, maybe 2-3 centimeters, 5 centimeters at a time with a scrape. And all of a sudden you just start to see these lines. And so we start to spray paint them. And after a pretty short period of time, we can make out the systems. And so you'd have your lateral canal running in oftentimes. Then you'd have your lateral ditches coming off of that. And in between the ditches would be 2 field cells. And oftentimes these lateral ditches would run out 5 to 7 field cells long. And then after you're out that far, you'd have another big, larger ditch running along, bringing the water in, and you'd have a whole nother set of fields on the other side of that. So this was a way for them to move the water around in the fields where they don't have a huge amount of water. It's low water use. They don't have big fields. They have little tiny fields. They're not very big at all. So once they get a field cell like that watered, they might come in and move the water. You come in and you just say, I got enough in there, I'm done with that, I want to put water into here. I come back in, dig a little ditch, and we often see these weird in the corner side of the field. So they come in, dig out some of the dirt, fill that up, and you run right into the field. So they would just keep running that water around from field cell to field cell to field cell to field cell, water in their field cells across the landscape. And this is the stuff that we were able to look at down off of Sunset Road a few years back, when in those fields we found a spot where we could see the farmers had been walking through the fields, and we could see their footprints in the fields where they were walking around in the mud. And we're talking that stuff was about 3,500 years old, way back there. It's hard to date them. We have to date them by the stratigraphy, so the layers. And so when there's a flood, it's usually across the whole Santa Cruz floodplain, and we can see these layers. When we dig backhoe trenches, we can see the layers in those trenches. And we have some of those layers that we see everywhere, and we've dated those. We find archaeological features that have fire hearths in them. And so we date them from those fire hearths using C14. From that, we know pretty much how old that layer is, and we know what we should find in those. And it works like clockwork. We can tell, okay, this is this old, this is this age, and this is what we predict we should find in them. And lo and behold, it is. It'll be exactly what we should find in them. And that's from having done lots and lots of excavations, so we know what the stuff should look like. But we're always learning. Every time we go out, we find more and we learn more. There's no shortage of that. It's really cool.
Hey, Alan. I know that you just explained that the pit house was a replica from Honeybee Village up the road, and so I was wondering why you created the replica.
Well, this started over 6 years ago. Joyce had the garden here, and they run a summer camp out here, and she was wanting some shade for the kids, some stuff for them to do and some other activities and things. And so she had talked to Henry Wallace, who works for Desert Archaeology, and he's like, build a pit house. And so they're like, yeah, great idea. And so they got a hold of Bill Doley, who is my boss at Archaeology Southwest. And actually at the time I worked for Desert Archaeology. And I do lots of prehistoric replica stuff. And I've built a few pit houses in the past. I built one at Peter Community College. And so I was the natural candidate for it. So they're like, you want to build a pit house? Yeah. So we did. We got some volunteers and we came out here and we started working on this house over 6 years ago. And it's been held up through the whole time. And it's been a great thing for the public to see. So the public can come in and we can talk about the prehistoric folks that lived here, and we can talk about how they lived and what this stuff looked like.
Is there a terminology for that?
Yeah, experimental archaeology.
Very cool.
And actually, I've come to use it a different term with kind of what we do out here. It's experiential archaeology. So it's so people can come out and experience this stuff and do it.
So did you already explain why you used ponderosa pine in it?
I did not.
Oh.
That's a good question.
Okay. Yeah.
So when they were excavating some of the pit houses up at Honeybee Village, they found some of the houses had burned down. And so for archaeologists, that's the best thing you can hope for. Because when you get a burned down pit house, oftentimes those are the houses that have floor assemblages in them, and they're the houses that we can see some of the construction elements in, some of the burnt beams. So they were able to go in and they had some of the main support posts and some larger posts in some of these houses. They were able to get big enough chunks of the charcoal out to see what kind of wood it was, to do what we call a species ID. And a lot of them turned out to be pine, ponderosa pine from up on Mount Lemmon. So it was a surprise. Nobody thought they would be hauling in materials that far to build these houses.
Yeah. So you have this cleared off right now, and I know that your helpers today took some of it off. Did it all come off because of them, or did some of it come off naturally?
All of this came off because of them.
Oh, okay.
But we've had events out here where you have big rains, and especially it's not just one big rain, like a big monsoon rain. It's 1 or 2 days of rain. It's long rain over a period of time. And what happens, the worst thing that happens out here to this house is that the sidewalls, so you have the flat roof, it actually holds up pretty well in the rain. It's these sidewalls. Once this adobe gets saturated with water, it reaches a point where it sloughs, and it'll just slough the whole side off. So during the rainy season, we're have to be out here all the time working on it and fixing these walls because they want to slough off. It's just a continual process.
So one of the other things that I noticed in the past is that you actually left some of those spots, assuming that maybe they created windows, or
Yeah.
for airflow, etc.
And I actually think from working on this house, that the sidewalls around most of these houses were thatched or just with the reeds, with these mats. I'll show you a mat, what I'm talking about here. These are where I just take these sticks and weave them together like this with string. And then you lay these on the walls. So they probably just took these, and during the summertime, at times of the year, you would just have the outer edge of the house covered with those. So you would have air could blow through and go through the house, and you would have that draft cooling and everything. Some houses that you're using for storage, say you've got your corn or you're storing different food things that you want to protect from rodents and critters and elements, you would mud up all the way like this. But I'll bet you the vast majority of the houses that people are living in, you had mats and things around it like this. You had the roof mudded over and the sidewalls, you could almost see out of them, probably. Or they probably mudded up a little ways on this, so that if it did rain really hard, the water wouldn't run in. So we know there were berms around the outside edges of these houses. Archaeologically, when we excavate these houses, we can't see those berms because we use backhoes. We come in with big backhoes, we scrape the surface off of the ground until we can see the outline of the house pit, because that's usually all that's left. It's just that pit, the house pit, and the post hole. So when we dig that house pit, we come down on the floor. Some houses will have all the artifacts still on the floor. There'll be broken pots, there'll be all these things, and oftentimes those are burned houses. And so one of the questions with this is, like, we actually did this out here already. We had another little pit house right over here on the other side that was of an early ag time period, Cienega time period. So it represented about 2,000 years ago. And that house, we burned. We put a little assemblage of artifacts in it, and we burned it down to see what would happen. How easy is it to burn? That house, instead of having a mud wall like this, it was covered with grass, thatched with grass. And it went up like a torch. It was amazing. It was incredible. And so we learned that, yikes, you got to be really careful in your houses that are built like that. In this house, I've built many fires in the fire hearth in here, and I'll have it where I have flames up to here, and it's not gonna catch fire. So this is a much safer house to live in and to build.
And what's the time frame on this house?
So this was built. This style of house that this is based on is from the 700s to 800s, somewhere in that time frame, and from up at Honeybee Village. There are a lot of different varieties and styles of pit houses, and they probably vary also because of what materials you have on hand where you're at to use. So there's a lot of different factors involved in them, and they kind of change through time. So at this period of time you build houses this way, and another period of time you build, going into the 1200s, people stop building pit houses and they start building above ground structures with puddled adobe walls. And you can see a lot of these out in the Tortolitas out here. If you're out hiking around in the desert and you come upon a spot where there's these linear rows of rocks going across the desert, those are walls. Sometimes they're part of compounds, and then you'll walk around those and you'll find rectangular rooms with the rocks sticking up. We call those cimiento stones, and those are the base of the walls that they built. And
So really quickly, since you have mentioned that, as you finish that story, will you also tell people what they should do if they happen upon that?
Yeah, if you're out hiking around in the desert and you come across an archaeological site, it's okay to look at the site, look around, check it out. You can pick up artifacts and look at them. You can look at all these things, but don't disturb anything. Put it back, put the artifacts back, because it's what we call context. Everything means something where it's at. There's no written record for the prehistoric back in the past. So without that written record, the only thing we have that's left is the things themselves. And so if you're out there, you're poking around and you're kicking rocks out of the walls and you're picking up artifacts and taking them home, you're destroying that record. You know, what good is this thing on your shelf? It doesn't, it's like, oh, I got this beautiful thing sitting on my shelf. But it means nothing, because what it is, it's a history, and it's a history of the Native Americans who lived here before. So the Hohokam stuff, this early ag stuff I'm talking about, their ancestors are still here. Those people that were living in these places are still here. And for this area, it's the Tohono O'odham. They are the direct ancestors of the people that moved in down here, came into the Southwest prehistoric. And there may have been multiple migrations. It's just like today. People are moving around. So sometimes groups move through and stuff, and we see different things at different points in time. And that may be examples of migrations. We know a bunch of people from down here early on moved up onto the Colorado Plateau.
Yeah.
And then in the 1200s, a bunch of people from up there, northern Arizona, moved back down here. And then we got these enclaves of villages where they're making polychrome ceramics, multicolored, and those adobe puddled wall rooms are directly related to their migration back down here, and then everybody down here adopting that system. So it's really amazing what you can learn by studying all the things that are out there and by protecting them and preserving them.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. We
Sure,
really
Lynn-Ann.
appreciate your being a partner with the town of Oro Valley. I'm Lynn-Ann with the town. And we appreciate your partnering with the town and the Oro Valley Historical Society and having this here for our residents and providing so much information for our viewers. And I just want to put in my plea that yes, please leave alone all those things that you see out there, because when you take them the same way you could burn a book in history and no one can ever find out the contents of that book, that's what happens if you take the story from its place, is that we don't know the story anymore. So please leave those things alone. Thank you so much for sharing, and please enjoy.